Welcome to Capitalize. Let's do a video walkthrough of how you actually play this game in case you don't love reading the instructions. First off, the goal of Capitalize is the first player to reach $1 million in net worth or the last player standing in the rare event that everyone goes bankrupt. Now, to understand the game, there's a couple of core principles that you need to actually understand. And the most important thing is your actual information card that every player will actually get. Now, I want to start with this because this will help you understand one, what things cost, what things are worth, and ultimately what kind of income you're going to be getting. So you can start thinking about what kind of strategy you're going to have when you start playing the game. Now, on this card, if you actually rotate it, you will see the different types of information that I just mentioned. Now, the important thing to note is that in the worth category, these are what your assets are actually worth on the board, which is super important because you have to actually keep track of what your net worth is as you play this game because that's how you ultimately win. And a couple cool things to note on here is that when you actually buy an asset, it is typically worth more the second you actually purchase it. For example, if you were to buy a stock for $95,000, the second you buy that stock, if you were to go sell it your next turn or same turn, it's essentially worth $100,000. So super important to plan your strategy based on what things are worth, what things will cost you, and ultimately what kind of income it's going to bring in. Let's talk about table setup. Now, there are two main ways to actually set the board game up. We have it set up in the classic or standard version here, which is everyone just having their own quadrant or their own section. Alternatively, you can play a different way where each player goes around the table and places one piece of their land until they've placed 9 pieces, and then the remaining spaces are filled with just white neutral land to play a little bit more of a different strategy type game because that will be a lot different on what kind of pieces you can actually build later in the game, which I will get into in a bit. But for now, we're going to just do the classic or the standard version. Okay. Everyone starts with $50,000 cash, and then starting with the youngest player at the table, you will go around clockwise to determine what industry you are going to be, which means you take one die and you roll it to see which industry it is, as well as picking which color you're going to be. In the event that tax is rolled, court of justice, or everyone on both die, then that player needs to roll again to actually determine which industry they're going to be. Now, the rule book will have what each industry's benefits are, so I recommend checking those out. Each industry has a different strategy and a different way of actually winning the game and taking advantage, or shall we say, capitalizing on their specific skill sets. Additionally, in the event that 2 players roll the same industry, or 3 players, or God forbid, 4 players roll the same industry, then each time someone is in the same industry as you, that means there's more competition in that industry. So your salary is knocked down by $5,000. So, for example, let's say there are 2 players who rolled a builder. That means on their roll, as we play the game, they will not receive a $15,000 salary. They will each receive $10,000. Now, if 3 players rolled a builder, that means that each one of those players will only receive $5,000. And if everyone on the board rolls a builder, that means that no one will receive any money when that is rolled throughout the game. If you are unhappy that you are sharing the same industry as someone else, or you're just unhappy with the industry that you received, you can actually go to school at any point, pay $5,000 to change to whichever industry you want, and then you will ultimately skip your next turn because you'll be in school changing industries. Keep in mind, it's really important where your pieces of land are at because you cannot buy just any piece of land on the map. You have to buy land that is adjacent to one of yours. So we're talking side by side right here, or with a tip actually touching to purchase that land, which would be one of these right here because these tips are still touching and this is adjacent. So it is very important where your land is at because you can't just buy whatever land on board. Okay, now that we have the game board all set up and everyone kind of knows what's going on, who they are, and maybe has an idea of what their strategy is going to be, I'm going to run you through what an actual gameplay or a turn would look like. So first, let's just say I am a finance guy. That's the industry that I am in right now. And let's say it is my turn. So to start out, I'm going to start by collecting my investment income. And it's important that we talk about what investment income is. Now, investment income is the income that you are seeing on your information card. So it's income that you receive from stocks, from suburbans, from urbans, and from cities. This does not mean your salary. So my salary as finance, if I'm the only one who's finance on the board, that means my salary is $15,000. I do not collect that at the start of my term. Very important. You only collect your investment income. Now, as a side note to that, if I was a banker, at the start of my turn, I would collect potentially income because of my actual skill set. If everyone has more than $50,000, then I collect $5,000 as a banker. So that's the only situation where you would actually be collecting money outside of the assets that is listed on your info card. So step one, I would collect my investment income as a finance bro. I am not collecting any income right now because I only have land on the board, which takes me to step two of my turn, where I can buy and or sell up to 2 items. So what I'm going to do on this turn is I am actually going to be buying a piece of land here for $10,000. So I will place that there. And I'm also going to be selling a piece of land. So I'm going to sell this piece of land for $10,000 as well. So I actually have a net zero. I'm not paying to the bank anything. I'm not receiving anything because I bought a piece of land and I sold a piece of land. You then move to step three on your turn, which is actually rolling. And you can roll. See what I get here? I got builder and tax. So builder means that everyone who is a builder in the game would receive their salary. Now, if there's only one builder, they'll receive $15,000. If there's two builders, they'll each receive $10,000. So everyone is participating on this roll. And I also received tax, which I will get to in a bit on what that means. Now, an important thing to note, which is a huge misconception, is let's say I were to have bought suburban land during that turn. If I would have bought a suburban piece of land and I would be placing it right here, a lot of people think since they bought it for $35,000 and they see that the income generates 2,000, a lot of people want to collect the 2,000 right when they buy it. You cannot do that. You must buy your asset, and you can only collect that investment income at the start of your turn, which means your next turn in this case. Now, it's important to know where your land is at, which is kind of why I bought this piece and sold this piece, because if I place a suburban triangle right here, I can still, maybe that turn or the next turn, place another suburban triangle right here. Very important that you actually place suburban tiles only on top of land tiles. On top of that, let's say later down the line in the game, I wanted to build some urban triangles. Urban triangles can only be placed on top of suburban triangles, which means that I would be placing my urban triangles on top of my suburbans just like this. I cannot place an urban triangle on top of land. Not allowed to do that. You got to develop it to a suburban piece of land before you can actually turn it into urban. Now, this is also a great opportunity to talk about how the board actually works, because another common misconception is, let's say we all went around and did our turns and it comes back to me. Now, if I had my board set up like this, I have 3 urbans and technically there is still a sliver of a suburban triangle showing. So I would go to my info card and I would go, okay, for each urban, I get $5,000. So that's 5, 10, $15,000. And for suburban, I get 2. So with this board placement, I would get $17,000 at the start of my turn. That would be my investment income. Now, it's really important to note that not only does this count towards my actual investment income at the start of my turn, but it also counts towards my net worth. If I look at the worth category on my info card, I would see that urbans are worth $100,000. So I would be worth 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, and suburban is worth 50. With this section right here, I am worth $350,000. And then I can add my land, 360, 370, 380, 390, $400,000. On the board, I am worth $400,000. Let's say I had $50,000 in my pocket. I am now worth $450,000. And let's just say I had a real estate stock, which is worth $100,000. That also gets added to my net worth. Now, I mention this because the second I place this urban on top of this suburban right here to have full urbans, I can no longer count that suburban towards my investment income at the start of my turn or towards my net worth. The suburban land no longer exists because it is all urban placements. Which leads me into the last piece. Once you have a full triangle of urbans place, you can then replace it with a city. Now the city goes on top of that. And again, same rules apply. You are now only collecting income on the city, and you're only collecting your net worth of the city, not everything below it. Now, another super important component during this with your assets on the board is actually when you go to sell assets. Now, hopefully, you never really need to sell, or maybe your strategy changes and you end up having to sell something. Well, it's really important because if I were to sell my city in this situation, if I were to sell my city, I am selling everything. I don't get to just sell my city and then keep all my urbans underneath. When you are replacing a full triangle, it is effectively like there is nothing below that. So if I were to sell my city, all of these pieces would come off the board. I would sell it for what it's worth, which it's worth $425,000. I would get that cash. All of this would be removed, and all of this land would then go to neutral land. So it's really important that you are strategic with how you actually build out your empire, because if you ever have to sell that city, you lose everything underneath it. Because if you think about it in real life, if you sell a city to someone, you don't get to keep the urban or the suburban land or the land underneath it. You're selling the entire city. And ultimately, that's how it works when you're selling your pieces in here. I'll give you one more example with that. Let's say that you have this setup here with 3 urbans and still had your suburban right there, and you had to sell some urbans. Well, if you sell, let's say, 2 urbans, you still get to keep your suburban because you still have your 1 urban on the lam. And even if you were to sell all 3 urbans, you are still keeping that suburban because you had a sliver of it alive. You were still collecting the investment income on it, and you were still collecting the worth of the suburban on there. So again, very important how you actually sell your assets on the board because it matters of what you get to actually keep. All right, now let's look at the actual dice themselves. So in the event that, let's say 2 hammers were rolled, that means 2 construction. That person who is construction or multiple people who are construction gets paid double. $15,000 each, or if there are multiple people in that industry, then you have to account for that accordingly. But doubles are awesome. Another thing that's awesome is when everyone is rolled. When everyone is rolled, everyone gets paid. And if it's double everyone, everyone gets paid double. So if your salary is 15 and 2 of these guys get rolled, you get $30,000 on that roll. Now, on some not so awesome rolls is, let's say, if the tax is rolled. Now, if tax is rolled, this is an event that everyone is involved in and no one likes it because no one likes taxes. So the way taxes work is, let's say back in our setup, I had 2 urbans and a suburban here and these land. When a tax is rolled, you have to pay your salary and all investment income that you are currently earning. So again, let's say I had a real estate stock, and let's say I had my suburban and 2 urbans. Each of these urbans are paying me $5,000. So that means I'm getting $10,000 from urbans, $2,000 from suburban. So that's $12,000 for my investment income, as well as my stock. My stock, I'm collecting $10,000 on an action event. So back in my scenario with 2 urbans, a suburban, my income, and my real estate stock, let's add it up. $10,000 is paid here, 15 with 1 urban, 20 with 2 urbans, 22 with my suburban, plus my income of $15,000. So that's $37,000 that I would have to pay in taxes if anyone were to roll this die. Now, everyone on the board has to calculate what their income is and pay their taxes to old Uncle Sam. So that means I would be paying that money to the bank. Now, in the event that I don't have the cash, luckily in this situation I do, but let's say I don't have the cash to actually make that tax payment, I have to fire sale my assets. I have to sell them at inopportune times to make sure the tax man gets paid, which means I am selling assets at half of what they are worth during that time. So if I wanted to sell my real estate stock to get enough cash to cover the taxes, I would only be getting $50,000 for this, and it would significantly impact me and where I'm at in the game, which then I would turn that back into the market. I would have to sell it, and then I would be collecting my $50,000 to then pay, hopefully, enough for taxes. Now, in the event that you have sold everything and you have no money to pay the tax man, you are effectively out of the game for now, and you do not get to participate in any roles or any action items moving forward. However, if someone else does roll your industry, then you will receive that income and you can pay off your tax liability. Only when your tax liability is fully paid off can you actually start rolling and join back into the game. Now, in the event of a court of justice roll, this one's a little more fun for the person who rolls it, not really for everyone else who's playing. But if you were to roll a court of justice, that means you can sue any other player on the board and take that alleged defendant to court for $20,000 in damages. Now, you don't have to sue anyone if you don't want to, but if I were to roll this, typically I'm going to go for whoever's winning or whoever sued me last, and I'm going to sue them for $20,000, and that player would need to pay me $20,000. Again, same rules apply as if it were a tax. If that player does not have $20,000 cash, they must fire sale some assets to pay me for the damages. Now, those are all the roles, but let's actually talk about the stocks in particular. There are three different type of stocks, and there are three stocks for each. Each stock on the stock card will tell you what it gets you in terms of income wise and what actually it costs you. So, for example, let's talk about real estate stock. Real estate stock, you will receive $10,000 when any player, if I owned this stock and any player were to buy land, sell land, suburban or urban, I would collect $10,000. Now, it's very important to actually read this that you only are collecting that income when someone buys land. You are also collecting income when they are selling land, suburban or urban, not when they are buying urban or suburban. So only when they are buying land and also when they are selling any other type of real estate, you would collect $10,000. Now, it's important to note that there are only three real estate stock cards, which means only three of them can be bought. Another thing about the stocks is when someone sells their real estate stock, it ultimately hurts the other shareholders that own this stock, which means they're going to effectively have to pay $10,000 because you are selling that stock. So if I owned, let's say, two pieces of real estate stock, and someone else owned a piece of real estate stock, if they sold that real estate stock, I would have to pay $20,000, 10 for each, just because they sold that stock. On the flip side, if anyone on the board were to actually buy some land, I would collect $20,000, 10,000 for each. And let's briefly talk about the other stocks. Now, on construction stock, this is a fun one. When any player builds a suburban or urban piece, you collect $10,000. So again, real estate is only when they're buying that land when it comes to buying and then selling anything. But construction is when anyone builds an urban or suburban piece of land, you will collect $10,000 for every share that you own. And same thing, anytime someone sells a piece of construction stock, you will be paying $10,000. And then we'll talk about the last stock, which is banking stock. And banking stock is a fun one if you like math. So the way that banking stock works is at the start of the stockholder's turn, which is my turn if I own the banking stock. Only at the start of the stockholder who owns the stock. At the start of their turn, for every $100,000 in cash that is outstanding in people's actual cash, we're not talking about assets, but actual cash that's in their account, for every $100,000 of cash outstanding, you would collect $5,000. So in the event that I'm playing by myself in this scenario and I've got $100,000, I would collect $5,000 at the start of my turn. Now, if every player on the board that was playing with four people all had $100,000, I would be collecting $20,000, $5,000 for each $100,000 that is currently in the bank. And then again, with like the other stocks, you will pay $10,000 if anyone were to sell a banking stock and you were a shareholder of that stock. And that's how the various components work. So again, to be the winner of the game is the first person, important note here, at the start of your turn. At the start of your turn to have $1,000,000 in net worth. So that doesn't necessarily mean if during my turn I were to buy something that would get me to 1,000,000, or let's say at the end of my turn when I rolled and I got some cash, even though I might have $1,000,000 during that time, I did not have $1,000,000 net worth at the start of my turn. So very important thing to note there. But the first player to reach $1,000,000 in net worth at the start of their term is victorious. And again, you calculate your net worth by looking at your info card and adding up all of your assets on what they're worth, all of your cash in the bank, and all of what your stocks are worth. Another thing to kind of make the game a little more fun is to actually change what the goal is. So instead of playing to $1,000,000 net worth, maybe play to 2,000,000 or 3,000,000 or 1,500,000. Different play styles and different net worth goals will actually change up how you play the game, and it makes it a lot more fun. So play around with some of that. Now, as I mentioned, in the rare event that there are multiple bankruptcies, it is ultimately last player standing. So I hope you have fun playing the game of capitalize, and I hope you ultimately capitalize on your strengths and your industry. So have fun playing.